Okay, so let's continue here with our shader setup. We need to set up some materials for this scene to get it to look pretty good. So let's go ahead and get started. So looking at our scene here, we don't have too many objects to apply shaders to, so let's try to do this quickly here. What we can do is select this object right here and assign to it a new shader. And the shader we're going to be working with pretty much exclusively in this scene is going to be over here. If we go to Material, we can go ahead and select the Architectural shader, and that's the shader we're going to place on that object. So let's go ahead and let's open up the render tree for that object and see what changes we can make here. First thing I'm going to do is select the material here, and I'm going to rename it to red. And I'm going to open up the architectural shader itself and make some changes to it. Video editor, edit that out of the video. We're starting again. The shader was supposed to be green, not red. Starting again in 3, starting again in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and take the material here. I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to make this a green material, so I'll just call it green. And I'll come over here to the architectural shader properties. Let's make some changes. I'm going to take the red channel here and knock it down to about 0.2, 0.27 something. Right about there is pretty good. That's not bad. And I'm going to take this one here. Actually, I think I'm going to leave this around the 0.5 range. And I'll take the blue channel down here and knock that down to about somewhere between 0.2 and 0.3. I guess we'll just leave that 0.287 is fine. The weight, I'm going to actually knock that down to about, I'm sorry, not 75, 0.75. And let's see transparency and reflection over here. Okay, let me go ahead and lock down that PPG, and I'm going to close the render tree there. I'm going to go back to my first view right here, and I'm going to do a render preview and see what I get. That's what I get. There's my little green ball there. That architectural shader is simply just awesome. Okay, so here's my reflection settings. I want to change my reflectivity. I want to make it a little bit more reflective. So I'll change it from 0.6 to default to 0.75. And that's what we get. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and give it some glossiness. Basically the way this works is if we give it some glossiness, we're going to blur out those reflections real nice. It's very physically accurate and looks excellent. So let's go ahead and knock the glossiness down to about half, so 0.5, see what we get. It's still not too glossy, though you can see some glossiness there and a lot of artifacting. To get rid of the artifacting, we have to increase the amount of glossy samples. Beware, however, unless you have a very powerful rendering machine, increasing these samples is going to dramatically increase your rendering time. So just be aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and knock down the glossiness even more. I'm going to drop it down to about 0.15. And we're going to end up with this result here, which is very noisy, but now you can't see the reflection. That's exactly what I want. I want this very glossy type of reflection to it, where something's reflecting, you just can't see what. And I'm going to increase my glossy samples, of course. Let's increase it to 16. And you notice the change right there. It looks a little bit better, not too great. So let's increase to a very high number. Let's go to 64. Let's just jump to 64 real quick. We should have ourselves a nice, that's much nicer. Of course, there's still some artifacting. To get myself a really good result, I would have to go up to about 128 glossy samples. That's going to give me a great result for the glossy shader there. And this thing's just rendering fast. You can see how there's pretty much no artifacting. I mean, there is, but that's because my anti-aliasing settings are set to a preview type mode. So there you go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to knock that back down to 64 because I'm still in my preview stages here, and I don't want to go too crazy with all of these quality parameters and things like that. I'm going to leave all these other settings alone. They're pretty good. Indirect illumination, I don't want to mess with anything there. The default settings are fine. I don't want to change anything in ambient occlusion. Optimization, I'm not really going to change anything. And over here in additional options, let me see. I'm not going to change any settings here. It looks perfectly fine. Okay, so so that shader actually is looking pretty good. Okay, let me go ahead and close that right there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to hit Control and 7 to open up the material manager here. You can see my green shader. I'm going to be using this green shader for pretty much the rest of these little Christmas ball objects, these spheres. So instead of creating new shaders and tweaking all the settings manually over and over again, what I'm going to do is just right click on the green shader and duplicate it. And I'll take this green one here and I'm going to rename it. I'm going to need a red one, so I'll just call that one red. Duplicate again. I'm also going to need probably a blue one. And let me duplicate again. And let me just leave this one alone for the moment. I'll come back to it a little bit later. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Alright, let me take this blue one here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the material here. Let me go ahead and close the material manager. And you can see that because I duplicated the material, all of my settings remain the same, which is exactly what I want. I basically want all these things to look pretty uniform. The only thing I want to change is the color. So let me take the diffuse color here and let's change it. We're going to go ahead and make this sort of a bluish type of hue here. So I'm going to knock the red channel to about 1.58. I'm going to take the green channel and put that about 1.6, something like that. And the blue channel, I'm going to raise that to about 0.5, in the high 0.5 range, so we get this nice blue color. And if we do a render preview, we'll see what we have here. We don't have anything, of course, because I forgot to apply the blue shader that I just created to an object. So let me open up the material manager here, and I'm simply going to take this blue shader and I'm going to apply it to this sphere that's right there. So with the sphere selected, I'll just right click on the blue shader and click on assign to selection. There we go. So it should be assigned, and I'll go ahead and render this out. And there we go. Very nice. Now I'm going to switch from hidden line removal mode here. I'm going to switch to constant shaded, and I'm also going to go ahead and turn on wireframe on shaded. So it basically looks just like hidden line removal mode, only now I can see my colors from my shaders applied to my objects, which obviously is going to help me to not make those kinds of mistakes that I just made a moment ago. Okay, so the next one. Let's go ahead and open up our material manager here again. Let's go to the red shader here. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop the red shader onto this sphere that's over here in this corner, and I'm going to open up its PPG here and make some changes. Again, the only change that I'm going to make is pretty much make this red. So I'll just play with my my color hue here till I get something that's red. So pretty much red channel at about 0.5, 0.56, something like that. It's going to work out just fine. So let me close that. Another render preview here real quick. That's rendering very fast. Okay, there it goes. Looks beautiful. Very, very nice. Very realistic. Okay, so let me close that. Let's open up the material manager here. And we still have this this one right here called blue 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a gold type shader out of this. So let me rename this to gold. Okay, let's open up its PPG and make some changes. Okay, so let's change the colors here. I'm going to take the red channel and knock it all the way up. I'm going to take the green channel here and knock it almost all the way up to about 0.9, something like that's going to look pretty good. I'm going to take the blue channel here and take that to just past the midpoint, so past 0.5 to about the 0.6 range. And it's going to give us this sort of soft yellow color, and you're probably thinking, well, that doesn't look like gold. Well, don't worry about it. We'll make it look like gold. The weight I'm going to leave alone. Now, for this one, if I do a render preview, we're not going to get something that looks too good. And again, I forgot to apply the shader. Shame on you, i3D Jack. Let's go ahead and apply that gold shader to our sphere back there. That was the whole point of turning on constant mode, so I can avoid that problem from happening. Looks like you can't avoid things when you got a bad memory there. Okay, so there's the gold shader. It doesn't look too great. So let's go ahead and close that. Let's go to the transparency and reflection tab here, and what we're going to do is make some changes to the way that this thing reflects, and that's going to make our shader look a whole lot better. The first most notable change I'll make is that I'll make it completely reflective. So I'll just take the reflectivity, knock it all the way up to 1. Okay, and for the glossiness, I don't want it to be too glossy. I want to actually be able to see some reflections off of this. So I'll go to 0.3, and glossy samples, I'll leave that alone. I'm also going to check on the metal material parameter here, which is going to give us a much better looking reflection. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and take the anisotropy, and I'm going to increase that to 3. That's going to give us some interesting reflections. Everything else I'm going to pretty much leave alone. Okay, so now let's see what we get. There we go. Aha. Much nicer. Semi-glossy reflections. You can actually see some reflections. Looks very metallic looking. Very nice sort of fake gold little Christmas decoration there for your tree. Okay, excellent. Let me close that. Looks very nice. I love that architectural shader. Okay, so let's create some more shaders for our scene. Alright, let me go ahead and open up the material manager here. There's our gold shader. What I want to do right now is create another type of gold shader. I want another type of gold shader to go on top of these things, but I don't want it to look like this nice clean gold color like we did with this sphere. I want it to look kind of like dirty. More like, I guess you could say like a dirty kind of brass, so to speak. So let's create a shader that kind of mimics that look. So what I'm going to do is take the gold shader here and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to take the duplicate, which is called gold 1 by default, and I'm going to call it dirty gold, or you can call it brass, really whatever you want. Okay, and the next thing I'm going to do is apply that dirty gold shader to all the objects that I need it to go on. So the objects I need it to go on are this object here, this one, this one, this one, basically these little top cap pieces and the little rings that are attached to it. Oh, that one's kind of penetrating the floor there. Okay, I can go back to my camera view there so that I can see them there. And I'm going to go ahead and right click on dirty gold and assign to selection. Okay, now we'll go to dirty gold. We have to make some changes here. And we'll just select one of these guys and open up a render tree and make the changes here. I'm going to get rid of this little preset manager view on the left here just by clicking on this arrow that activates it and deactivates it. And we're going to go ahead and make some changes to this shader. So let's open up its PPG. Now, for the reflectivity and transparency and things like that, obviously I don't want to make it transparent, but in terms of the reflectivity here, what I want to do is I want to change the reflectivity. I don't want it to be controlled by a simple numerical parameter here like this one. Instead, I'm going to use another node to control that. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go over here and let's open up the preset manager. Let's go to illumination, or actually we're going to probably have to go to texture. Now let's go to texture over here, and we want to grab ourselves a fractal. So let's grab a fractal, drag and drop it down here into the render tree. Close that, we don't need it anymore. And what we're going to do is control two different parameters in the architectural shader using this fractal node right here. And the way that we're going to do that is actually pretty easy. We're going to take the fractal and connect it to the architectural shader, and you can see we have a long list of different ports we can input this into. And the one that we're looking for is the reflection color. So it's going to be this one up here, REFL for reflection and color. So plug that in there. And we're also going to take it and plug it again, but this time we're going to plug it into the actual reflectivity, which is this one right here, just above the reflection color. Okay, and because the inputs are different, for example, the input coming from fractal is RGB, and the reflectivity is scalar. We can't just connect the fractal straight to the reflectivity. So XSI automatically creates this conversion node that converts color data to scalar data. So it works out just fine. Let's open up the fractal node here and see what changes we can make to it. Okay, in the first tab here, the texture tab, we're not going to make any changes, so let's just switch on over to the fractal tab. I'm going to leave it to the noise type to Perlin. I'm also going to change the complexity here to 3. And we can actually see the changes of this. If we click on this little V icon on the architectural shader, we can actually get a little shader ball preview here of what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and keep that active so we can see the changes that we make. I'm going to take the diffusion, knock that down just a bit, something like that. The upper bound, maybe I'll knock that down to like 0.8, something like that. You don't have to be totally exact here. The frequency multiplier, I'm really going to crank that up. I'm going to crank that to about 7, if not more than that, to give myself a higher frequency here. And the minimum level, I'm going to go ahead and increase that by a little bit, something like that. And you can just go ahead and play with these until you get a look that you like. Let me take the threshold here and knock that down to something like 0.4. Works out pretty well. And the, let me see, I'm sorry, not the level decay, the threshold here. Let's leave the level decay to 1 and take the threshold of about 0.4, zero point 0.5, something like that. Time we'll leave alone, as well as the absolute value. So we get sort of this noisy effect here, which will give us a dirtier look. And since it's plugged into the reflection color and reflectivity, it's going to give us a pretty neat effect. As far as the advanced tab goes, I'm not going to make any changes there. I don't really need to. So this is going to give us a dirtier look. So let's go ahead and do a render preview here and see what we have. And actually, it's a little bit difficult to see. You'd have to zoom in pretty close. We're not going to do any close-up shots of this, but just to show you the effect there. It's a very subtle effect. We're just affecting reflectivity, but you can see it pretty good right there. We get sort of this unpolished, dirty type effect to reflectivity, like this thing has had fingerprints on it. It's been in a closet or a box somewhere in your attic. During the year waiting for Christmas time or the holidays to come around. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's continue on making our shaders. We still have to make a shader for this cup right here. So let's open up the material manager here. Let's go to materials. Let's create a new, actually let's not create a new material from here. Let's just select the cup or the glass, and let's just go to material and apply an architectural material from here. It's much faster. Okay, moving along here, let's go to illumination. We're going to leave all these settings alone. Let's just go to transparency and reflection here. And we're going to go ahead and take the transparency and knock that all the way up to 1. This is going to be completely transparent. We'll leave the index of refraction at 1.4. Of course, you can play with that and change it if you like, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that. Reflectivity, I'm going to leave at the default. Glossiness, I am going to give it a little bit of glossiness just to make it look like a rough cup that's been used a bit. And glossy samples, I'll increase that to about 32, or actually 64. Actually 32 will work out pretty good, just to reduce our rendering time here. I got a pretty fast system, but I'm still so cheap, I like to squeeze out as much rendering time as I can. Okay? And for the rest of these options, I'm just going to leave them alone. I don't need to make any changes to them. So let's do another render preview and see what we end up with here. And there's our glass cup. Looks pretty nice. There we go. And this 8-core machine is just ripping through these renders like it's nobody's business. Okay, so there's our glass cup. Looks pretty good. Of course, when we increase our quality settings, it'll look even better. And when we add some lens shaders here, it'll look even better. Oh, there's a little sphere over there that I forgot to apply shader to. So let's go over to this guy. Let's select him. Let me open up my material manager just to make sure I didn't make a shader for it earlier. And it looks like I didn't. Let me take, say, this red one here and duplicate it. And I'm going to take this guy here and let's make a little purple shader here. Let's make a purple one. Close that material manager. Let's make some changes to this. As we did for the other spheres, we're going to leave the shader alone. The only change we're going to make is the color. So let's take the green channel here, increase it to about 0.2. Take the blue channel here and let's increase that to just past 0.5 to give us that purple type color right there. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll reduce that a little bit. Now I'm not going to get too picky with that. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the material manager here, and we'll go ahead and drag and drop the purple shader onto that sphere over there. Sorry there, buddy, for forgetting about you. And let's go ahead and do another render preview here, see what we get. And very nice. There we go. Okay, excellent. So we have almost everything shaded. There's still a couple of more shaders here to go for the tiles down here. Okay. So what we're going to do is just select the tiles, go over to material, and again, let's apply an architectural material. These are the most photorealistic materials, by the way, that you're going to be using in exercise 7. Okay, so I strongly recommend you use them if photorealism is what you're going for. Okay, let's take the color here and let's increase the red channel to about 0.7. We'll take the green to about the same amount, and we'll take the blue channel to about 0.6, something like that, to get sort of this very pale olive drab kind of color. Of course, it's your scene now, so you can create whatever color you want, whatever looks good for you. I'm just going to go with this one, but feel free to experiment with different colors and get the look that you want. Let me go over here to transparency and reflection, and we're going to go ahead and take the reflectivity. Let's lower it. I don't want these tiles to be too reflective, and I want them to be very glossy. I don't want them to look like glass or like they're wet or anything like that. Let me increase these glossiness samples to 64, and everything else looks pretty good. Yeah, I think I'm going to be happy with that. Let me do a preview render and see how this looks. And there we go. Oh, that looks excellent. Very, very nice. Okay. Very, very cool. I like that. I really like the way that the reflections look on those tiles. Looks excellent in my opinion. Uh, but I'm going to make a little bit of a change, and this will give me a chance to show you another feature of the editor. Edit that out of the video. Edit that out of the video. Somebody made a lot of freaking noise. I don't even remember where I was. Starting again in 3, 2, 1. Let me show you another feature here to control the reflections. Let's go to optimization, and down here in this lower area where it says reflection, we can actually make some changes to the fall off. Fall off is basically going to control the distance of the reflections. So let's do a render preview here just so we have something to compare to a before and after image. Okay, so this first image doesn't have any type of reflection fall off. You need to look closely at the tiles here to be able to see the subtle difference. I'm going to lock that preview down, move it out of the way, and I'm going to enable the reflection fall off for the shader, and I'm going to increase the distance. If you leave a distance of 0, it means the distance is unlimited. So it's practically the same as not using fall off. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a distance of about 20, and that's going to work out pretty well. Let me do another render preview now with this setting. I'll place this right underneath here, and we can do a little compare and contrast here. Now the difference is going to be pretty subtle, but if you look carefully you will be able to notice it, and you can already start to see it. The top image, and let me lock this down right when it's finished just so it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, so the top image is not using any type of reflection fall off, which is the default setting. That means that everything in the scene is going to be reflected by these tiles. As you can see, here's the red sphere being reflected. Here's also the green one. Here's the blue one. Here's that gold one, so on and so forth. And we can see some reflections here of the environment. Although it's very subtle, you really can't see them because they're glossy. Okay. Down here in this lower image, we're using reflection fall off. What this means is that the image is basically falling off. Or I'm sorry, not the image, the reflection is falling off. And you can see here, the best way to show you is by a visual example. Here you can barely see the red sphere. We can no longer see the blue sphere. We pretty much can't see it, if at all. And the gold sphere is pretty much gone. We can't even see it here. We can see the green one just barely. So what it does, it fades out the reflection. And if you look at objects in real life, look at a kitchen countertop, a shiny floor, something like that. Most things that are reflective will have a fall off like this in real life. The reflection will just kind of fade out with distance and you won't be able to see it. A few exceptions to that in real life are objects like mirrors and maybe windows, very, very shiny reflective windows. But most objects like ceramic, shiny varnished wood, things like that, or in this case these tiles, these ceramic tiles, are going to have some kind of reflection fall off property in the real world. So that's a way that this shader can imitate real life objects like this very, very physically accurately. Very, very physically accurately. So this is actually a very good thing to take advantage of. I strongly recommend you use it and increase the photorealism of your renders. So with that done, let me close that. We're almost done here. We just have one more shader to go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a different shader to the grout here of the tiles. That's basically this white area that's in between the tiles, also known as grout. We're going to go ahead and with the tile selected, we're going to go to clusters. I actually have a couple of clusters here selected. A tiles cluster, which represents the actual ceramic tiles, and then a grout cluster, which represents these in-between areas you can see here. So if the grout cluster is selected, I'm going to go to material, and I'm going to assign that an architectural material. You can see that it updated there. It has a new material. So with that selected, I'll hit 7 to open up the render tree here, and I'll rename this material to grout, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the material here, and let me see what changes I can make. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have the color controlled by a texture. I'm not going to have the color controlled by just a single diffuse color. I'm going to take the weight and drop that to 0.75. For the transparency and reflection, I'm going to knock the reflectivity all the way down. I don't need any type of reflectivity with this material, okay, because it's a very flat material. So with that done, what I'm going to do is just close that. I'm going to come over here to the preset manager, and under the texture category, I'm going to go down and get myself a rock. Just drag and drop it in there and close the preset manager. I'm going to take this rock and I'm going to plug it into the architectural shader. I'm going to plug it into the diffuse over here, which is basically the diffuse color. Let's open up the rock node here and make some changes. I don't have anything to do in the texture tab, so let's just go over to the rock tab. And the first color I'm going to leave at white. The second color, I'm going to increase that to about 0.8, something like that, to give me a lighter color there, closer to the lower end of 0.8, something like that. Okay, it doesn't have to be totally exact. The grain size, I'm going to lower that by quite an amount. And again, just like what we did with the other shader before, the fractal, we can go ahead and do a little shader ball preview there. I'm going to lower the grain size to something like 0.05 or 0.04, something like that. 0.044 will work out just fine. The fusion, I'm going to actually increase to about 0.1. And the mix ratio, I'll leave it alone. So we get this kind of dirty type of a look to our grout. And we'll do a little render preview here to see what we get. Okay, awesome. So there's our preview render. We're still far from complete with this scene. We still have to make a whole bunch of changes, and I still have to show you some of the new shaders and some different rendering techniques here using this example scene. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to end this video. We've been going for a pretty long while, and in the next video I'll just pick up from where I left off here, and we'll keep hammering away at this scene.